Hello? Hey, psst. Anybody scaring in here?
What comes to mind when you think of horror animation? Is it the quirky little monsters running a laugh-powered factory in Monsters, Inc.? Maybe it's Coraline, the blue-haired girl who slips through the secret door into a world that's just a little too perfect.
A parallel place.
We've been waiting for you, Coraline.
Or perhaps it's the kids who discover their neighbor's house is literally alive and have to stop it before Halloween in Monster House.
Get off my lawn! Trespasser!
Horror has shifted the way it is perceived to children, and more specifically, how that is impacted within animation. One of the biggest influences of horror animation today is Tim Burton. For the most part, even people that don't know who this man is have seen the whimsical, wonky, mysterious concepts in movies such as Edward Scissorhands, Beetlejuice, and various in movies that go as far as Batman Returns and Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Burton strives to create the concepts that bring a questioning of unusual classics that evolve within their time and era. In most of his films, he targets the dark tone that drastically appeals to younger audience just as much as the older ones. His horror animation has sculpted into his altered reality that has evolved through his other works of expressionistic styles of film, where he started off with animation by working for Disney, but was quickly rejected. Today, I will be exploring Tim Burton's horror animation, more specifically answering how his animations explore the concept of children's horror as a genre, and examining how traditional horror conventions are reimagined and adapted for a younger audience.
We did it!
Wasn't it terrifying?
Good night! Great Halloween!
These movies pertain to The Nightmare Before Christmas, Corpse Bride, and Frankenweenie. Burton's most obvious element of horror is through expressionistic and exaggerated uses of style that is incorporated through all of his animation and even his live-action ones. The twist edginess he adds to his characters by making them more dull and expressionless is splurged into the component of the uncanny. With the uncanny being rooted in the idea that what is familiar can also be strange, the concept is employed in various horror films and narrative writings. The horror genre often aims to expose common emotional and psychological fears to create discomfort.
Snakes and spiders in my hair.
This is Halloween, this is Halloween.
Burton's animated horror works to thrive on this dynamic. His characters, his world, they lean into that eerie discomfort. Think about how often he uses distorted reflections of reality, warped versions of suburbia, and characters that feel outside even in their own skin. They unsettle us, but we recognize ourselves in them too. And then there's the monster, another staple of the Gothic tradition. But in Burton's hands, the monster isn't just a villain or a threat. It's the misunderstood other, labeled as strange or dangerous, but who often ends up being the heart of the story. Through that lens, his animations don't just fit within the tradition of horror, they reshape it, especially for younger audiences. So rather than making broad claims about the genre as a whole, I want to zoom in on these Gothic elements, how Burton uses them to create a unique brand of animated horror that is both haunting and strangely comforting. These Gothic tropes lead us into the language of darkness and how Tim Burton explores this concept. In The Nightmare Before Christmas, Burton's language of darkness is introduced through the grim of whimsy of Halloween Town, a world where the twisted is celebrated and every skeleton or stitched together creature plays a part in deeply expressive society. The visuals deliberately incorporate crooked angles, deep shadows, and a muted color palette. This juxtaposition doesn't merely highlight aesthetic differences, it emphasizes Jack Skellington's emotional journey, his longing for something more than the grim familiarity of this world. Darkness here is both external and internal, mirroring his existential dissatisfaction and eventually self-acceptance. In Corpse Bride, the underworld ironically is depicted as more vibrant and lively than the cold, grey land of the living. The inversion is central to Burton's gothic sensibility, where death is not to be feared but understood and even embraced. Through skeletal jazz bands, candlelit corridors, and decaying elegance, the film redefines the language of darkness as a place of emotional truth and liberation. Emily, the Corpse Bride, is perhaps the most poignant example of this. Though physically marked by death, she becomes the most emotional, alive character, full of passion, sacrifice, and growth. Frankenweenie revisits childhood through the lens of a classic horror homage, with Burton drawing on the black and white cinematography and references to the 1930s monster films to shape his visual language. Burton has utilized this from the very beginning, such as his short animated film Vincent. Back to Frankenweenie, where the story of a boy reanimating his beloved dog plays out in a suburban setting, shrouded in storm clouds, shadows, and eerie silences. Here, darkness functions as nostalgia, a return to Burton's own childhood fascinations with the strange and supernatural. Yet again, the macabre becomes a vehicle for tenderness. Victor's grief and scientific curiosity are expressed through gothic motifs, proving that even the darkest spaces, light, love, and innocence can survive. Across these animated films, Burton's darkness of language is not merely stylistic, it is thematic. It allows characters to process grief, identity, and belonging. It turns the eerie into something empathetic and reminds us beneath every cobweb lies a story worth hearing. On to the next element. Sound plays a huge part in helping audiences connect with animated worlds, and in horror films, it's one of the most powerful tools for building tension and fear. Everything from the soundtrack to sound effects, even subtle background noises, adds to the atmosphere and emotional impact. In fact, horror often blends other genres like thrillers to create hybrid stories that use sound in creative ways. One interesting thing about the sound in these kind of films is how often it draws attention to itself. You can really feel how it's being crafted to shape the experience, almost like it's part of the performance. Burton uses non-diegetic sounds in order to capture the perspective of each one of the children and their reaction in order to grasp the change in the mood of the story. Danny Elfman, a longtime collaborator with Burton, has scored most of his films. Elfman places a large importance of understanding the visual style of Tim Burton. The rules of both sound and horror are constantly shifting. His inspiration is sifted once examining the script through visuals and adapting into genre of how he feels and interprets the characters and feelings. The core instruments he evolves within each of his compositions involve the use of horns, violins, and vocals. In most of his horror films, Burton uses sound to blur the line between fear and fascination. Sound becomes even more stylized and expressive, a hallmark of these films in this close collaboration between Burton and composer Danny Elfman, whose scores are as iconic as the visuals themselves. Elfman's music, with his off-Hitler rhymes, haunting melodies, and carnival-like instruments, mirrors the emotional beats of the characters and the gothic world they inhabit. The music often shifts abruptly between tones melancholy to manic, eerie to exuberant, reflecting Burton's themes of duality, life and death, beauty and decay, horror and humor. Tim Burton shifts these concepts into a way that are reshaped to the enjoyment of horror genre for all ages of audience.